Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And this is a bit of a detour. I've done my all-rap and all-country episodes of this series, but I've wanted to do a bit of a catch-up on a lot of pop and R&B releases, and what I've discovered is a lot of frustrating inconsistency, and not nearly as much greatness as I was hoping from among the big critically acclaimed albums of this year. Well, we can't all get everything that we want, and this knocks off a lot before the mid-year, so let's get on the pulse. So before we go any further, if you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. Also, if you share the video, it'd be much appreciated. These sort of multi-album comps don't tend to get a lot of traffic in the algorithm. Let's change it. But we got 6 projects on the docket. Let's first go back and talk about, from Yeule, Glitch Princess.
The only thing that's still okay, you let me cry and wipe my eyes and make me feel something other than.
So this is an album I've been hearing about since the beginning of 2022, and I really did want to get to it at some point. Yeule is a London singer-songwriter-producer who broke onto the scene with Serotonin 2 back in 2019. A really blissful slice of ambient pop and chillwave I found myself liking a lot more than I thought I would. The textures and vibes were just immaculate. Now, I was a little bit more concerned with this album, given that along the way they picked up some production credits from Danny L. Harl and an expanded team of engineers, and were reportedly disrupting some of those serene vibes with a lot of glitch and hyperpop, as well as an ambient piece that runs for over 4.5 hours. I checked it out. It's pretty decent, if not impressive or groundbreaking by ambient standards, but hey, the core is still here. I had some expectations this time around, and as a result, the album is actually still pretty good, but in swapping out a lot of the crunchy, scattershot glitch over the synths that flip between hazy ambient and bleeping chillwave, it leads to an album that feels more immediate, but not always making the most of it, especially if you were expecting stronger hooks to come out as a result. Instead, the glitch is more texture, echoing Yeule's painful introspection, a shuddering, textural experience as they peel through body dysmorphia, loneliness, depression, self-harm, and a lot of unrequited love, where it often feels so intimate that the inclusion of Danielle Harl's glossy but blown-out pitch-shifting bombast, it feels both unnecessary and a little out of place. Yeule could have easily handled this on their own, and the album would have likely been a fair bit better for it, especially as the vocal mixing feels unnecessarily contorted and compressed even before he adds on all the chipmunk filters. Hell, they make a jangling acoustic song with Don't Be So Hard on Your Beauty, and its brand of tortured love feels tactile in the way that hyperpop gloss wouldn't really flatter, as do a lot of Yeule's experiments with guitars like on Flowers Are Dead, or the sizzling swell of Fragments and I Heart You. Now, Danielle Harl's production does make songs like Perfect Blue pick up a certain glazed over tragedy, as the guest star Toji can't pick up on their pain, but I'm not always convinced it works with the chirpy bounce of Too Dead Inside or Bites on My Neck, even if they might fit as overcompressed upbeat bangers. And it's intriguing to draw a parallel to, say, the most recent Alice Glass album, where she had more focused compositions amidst the glitch, but messier framing and confronting abuse. Whereas Yeule tends to fold in towards themselves, which might make for weaker hooks all around, but a much more tangled, painful internal journey where the lack of a clear resolution is part of the point. As such, I would struggle to call this precisely great, but it was an intriguing listen. Definitely worth going back to hear. Check it out. Next up, from Ravyn Lenae, HYPNOS.
Wind me up, hold me down. If you love me, say it out. If you love me, say it out.
This is one of those debuts that feels pretty damn hyped, mostly built off a solid run of EPs throughout the latter half of the 2010s, and touring with SZA and No Name. If that's not a way to get me in the door to check out your sound, I'm not sure what is, especially as the critical acclaim came hot and fast for this debut. And well, it's one of those cases where from performance alone, I understand why this is going to attract a lot of attention, but I'm not entirely convinced there's more to actually follow through. Because let's make this clear, Ravyn Lenae is a gorgeous singer, hushed, sensual, with a lot of layered cooing that flirts with the baby voice, but doesn't bother me as much because, just as importantly, she's produced to emphasize the full extent of her range and maintain that sense of intimacy, nestled just perfectly into the mix. The extremely obvious comparison is Aaliyah, who I actually never really got into in the early 2000s before she passed, but given the current retro wave would be an easy win to replicate. You can certainly hear echoes in a lot of the melodies, but Ravyn Lenae's sonic palette feels a lot more textured and contemporary. There's touches of Solange's ethereal but very soulful side here as well that adds a lot of organic flavor. Yeah, the fluttery acoustic guitars, the hints of strings, and the gentle patter of more textured percussion to underscore the firm bass lines, it is here, but there's also this slightly alien synth murmur that adds a real steamy humidity to a lot of the songs. Sometimes it can feel a bit jerky and staccato like on Venom, where the wonkiness doesn't really help the warmth of the groove, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule, as songs like the dreamy Lullaby prove in spades. Frankly, if I'm going to nitpick anywhere, it'd probably come with some of the percussion feeling a little bit too programmed, where a live jazzy patter or more pulse from afrobeat would be a natural fit, like MIA or Xtasy produced by Kaytranada, especially in comparison to any of the trap digressions like the leaden bass on 3D with Smino that really didn't work for me. But it's all built up to set up this subtle, luxuriant experience where the spare melodies weave around the cycling grooves. It's just so blissful. And then after about 50 minutes pass, you realize at the jolt that the album's over, and you don't really remember that much of it. Which, sure, if you've gone under hypnosis at any point, it's familiar, hence the album title, but it also means that it washes over you without much in the way of standout hooks or turns of phrase that might catch a little bit more attention. If I compare this to a project like Jhené Aiko's 2017 album Trip, that same sprawling dreaminess is there, but there was a presence and core of storytelling that Ravyn Lenae seems to shy away from. The writing here is more deflective, and one that can create some mystique and allure, and it makes sense in the soft focused contemplation of Ravyn Lenae trying to find herself on cuts like Inside Out and Deep in the World, both within and without relationships. It can also feel a little flighty, more reliant on the vibes and the atmosphere, where you would expect the poetry to pick up more layers, but winds up feeling a bit too conventional for its own good. And that's not counting the breakup song moments like Mercury, where selling something that's more confrontational is just not in her wheelhouse. Don't get me wrong, this is a promising debut with a lot of style and texture that I definitely enjoyed, but it's lightweight and I'm not sure it's got a lot of sticking power, even with the songs that capture more of a hook. Very good, give it a shot, just not quite great. Next up from Lucky Daye, Candydrip.
Pray you keep us ground up. Press time. Already know we be lit when we roll.
Full disclosure, I've been looking for an opportunity to talk about Lucky Daye for a decent bit. He's one of those R&B insiders that if you read the liner notes, you occasionally see his name prop up as a co-writer, but in the late 2010s, he started working to build up his own R&B career, and it was a little slow going, especially as I found his debut album Painted to not quite click, mostly thanks to production. Now, thankfully, his 2021 EP, Table for Two, really put him in my good graces. It's a great little EP with a lot of great guest stars, definitely go check it out. And with Over getting a bit of chart attention from this album, I wanted to give this a proper chance, and yeah, it was worth it. But the more listens I gave Candydrip, the more I couldn't escape the feeling that Lucky Daye was missing something to put this in the same tier as Table for Two, with its high concept flair and its impeccable balance. Some of this might be Lucky Daye himself. He plays into the easygoing charisma of the Casanova type with a little bit more frustrated angst to add a bit of tension alongside the fun horniness, but he doesn't quite have the effortless magnetism of an Usher, the high-minded drama of Frank Ocean, or even the textural flair and humor of someone like Anderson .Paak. It's hard to escape the feeling that Lucky Daye's still searching for a unique voice outside of the shadow of his influences, and I'm not really a fan of his falsetto on songs like Feels Like or Compassion with Child. And for as much as the instrumentation flits across buttery R&B, liquid funk, and even some reasonably well-produced trap that can't help but feel kind of out of place, the foundation's kinda slippery. It's kind of strange because DeMille handles the majority of the production across the album and does a really solid job in terms of how he balances out the live percussion and the drum machines, the thick, supple bass lines, the liquid guitars and keyboard textures, and even how Lucky Daye bends and pitch shifts his vocals. I mean, seriously, between this and Silk Sonic, Tamil should be getting a lot more work, but it creates the impression of Lucky Daye as a bit of a shapeshifter, where he can write for anyone with a lot of competence, make a lot of really good songs, but hasn't quite fully formed his own presence to knock out his own best songs, put him out of the park. Granted, some of this seems to be an issue with the lyrics. Putting aside the moments that are just kind of slightly silly, like around any of the food references, like the interlude before the title track, my larger problem is that the scenes being painted feel kind of bare bones in a lot of their sensual imagery. They don't set enough of a stage. There's a lot of conflicted back and forth scenes implied on songs like Guess and Over, and the gorgeous Used to Be, and again, Over did grow on me as expected. But if you're trying to delve into the roots or any sort of deeper introspection beyond the sex, the reasons why it's all happening, it's just not as layered as Table for Two was. Although I will give credit for a really damn solid ending run of songs from Used to Be to Ego, where he does open up and highlight how his ego likely contributed to the instability in the relationship, and he's hoping she'll stick around as he does the hard work of repair. But when you've got a long, languid runtime that absolutely does not justify its length, it's an easy album to slip on if you want to cultivate a very specific vibe, but I'd struggle to say it's got a lot of replay value outside of that. It's really good stuff. I was kind of hoping for more though. Next up from LMA, Heart on My Sleeve.
What you're doing to me, spending my life with you only. So if I had to choose who could break my heart, baby, it'll be you.
I was a little bit surprised that I was actually looking forward to this project, mostly because I did not really care for LMA's debut all that much. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I don't remember being all that impressed by anything on it. From LMA as a singer, from Mustard's production, to any of the writing. I just took the absolutely excellent closing piano ballad Easy and moved on. A good thing too, that's one of the best songs of 2018. And it seemed like, outside of specifically an R&B, everyone else moved on too. It's been 4 years since that debut, LMA hasn't really been seen in the Hot 100 since, and it left me wondering where the hell she'd even go for a sophomore album. And I get why, cause this winds up feeling like a lateral move at best, and somehow I'm disappointed. And while a lot of this album falls apart for plenty of the same reasons that her debut did, we gotta start with the element that pretty much cripples this album out of the gate. The vocal production's god-awful. For a singer who isn't precisely a powerhouse like LMA, it might make sense to place her closer to the front of the mix, but it makes no sense to give her a vocal pickup that sounds so canned, manipulated, and poorly mastered. Less for stylistic flair, and more because it doesn't seem like Mustard's production team have any faith in her ability to carry a track on raw talent. And sure, Mustard has done this to certain R&B acts he's worked with in the mid-2010s, but when you get guest stars who actually do sound more organic in their pickups, like Lucky Daye and Her, it makes me question why they even chose to do it, especially as it only serves to make the project feel more anonymous. Granted, the larger problem is that I'm struggling to find much of a unique personality that LMA even brings to the table. On another album that feels unnecessarily bloated, we got a lot of overweight, bassy tremors, supporting percussion pulled in from 2014 snap beats and cheap-sounding trap percussion, and precious little instrumental melody that often feels swallowed up and contorted in a lot of watery layers, where it's clear that LMA is supposed to be the primary focal point to drive the songs, and that's not a good sign when the vocals are so compromised. This also really doesn't help any of the hooks pop off here, and minus much in the way of distinctive songwriting, LMA, once again, is one of the most indecisive and passive figures in mainstream R&B, and she's not especially poetic or innovative or transgressive in expressing a lot of her feelings. Thus, I find myself looking for the moments that come close to pulling free of all the oily murk, mostly when we get any hints of strings or any other producer besides Mustard that takes the lead. So with that, I guess I like the patient sentiments behind Trying with the strings that later ramps up into the more melodramatic pieces. It's one of the better hooks on the album. There's a cool Alexander O'Neal flip on Break My Heart. Feels Like is a nice swaggering deep cut that I'm actually kind of surprised LMA pulled off. And she does have a real knack for closers with Fading Out. It's a pretty nice song. But are they enough to get over the goopy messes of Leave You Alone, or How with Roddy Ricch, or the grainy headache of Didn't Say with Lotto? Unfortunately, it gives me the impression that even if LMA had another breakthrough here in terms of a single that lasts, nobody here is capitalizing on it effectively. And this long-delayed sophomore album only seems to confirm that. I mean, I was never a big fan to begin with, but even considering that, mediocre at best. I'd probably skip it. Next up from Kehlani, Blue Water Road.
I'm melting to you.
The last time I reviewed Kehlani, I found myself very frustrated with them, or even less them, more the fact the label didn't seem to have a clear idea where the hell to push their sound. They're a pretty damn good writer and performer, and they've got good instincts to where you would expect they'd be bigger, but on both Sweet Sexy Savage and It Was Good Until It Wasn't, I found that the production really let them down. So when I was starting to hear that this was going to be their best to date with more breezy and ethereal production for support, I was pretty skeptical, especially when looking at the credits. And while I do think this is generally a more consistent project than their last two, I still think it's not really matching the potential that Kehlani can deliver. And again, it's the production letting them down, most of which I'm going to blame on Pop Wansel, member of the perpetually mediocre production duo Pop and Oak. Not only is the vocal production overly compressed and wildly inconsistent song to song, depending on who produces and engineers it, with Cuck Harrell being the absolute worst offender here, and how he smothers Kehlani's vocals. But even when it comes to being placed and layered in the mix, we're also stuck with these watery, weedy guitars alongside lumbering percussion that doesn't build better groove than you would like to think to build to more of a lush, languid mix alongside the strings and the horns, at the very least strong hooks. And they just don't. Alongside maybe Alter, Melts, Get Me Started with Sid, that I'm frankly convinced co-writer Ravyn Lenae could have done more on her debut that I just talked about. Funnily enough, when Kehlani gets a few more pop and hip-hop leaning songs, a little bit more swagger and bounce, like the Sandy Wish I Never, or the groovy patter of Up All Night with Justin Bieber of all people, not only are their flows better, but they're also reasonably sticky, which highlights the weird dichotomy of this album, where it wants to be fluid, atmospheric, this gorgeous exploration, but it keeps on forcing the vibe rather than letting it develop naturally. And I wish the lyrics could make up for more of it. Kehlani's playful brand of sexual provocation has always had a lot of charm for me, and embracing a lot more of their lesbian side is a nice touch, especially as they'll paint more complications, like the regrets and mistakes on Little Story, or the exasperation on Wish I Never, or the more outright sensual cuts like Alter and Melt and Get Me Started. The last coming with some really good uncertainty and give and take with Sid that I thought came through pretty well. But then there's More Than I Should, where even if you're playing morally ambiguous, and it might make sense in context with Kehlani's misadventures and miscommunications across this album, the attempted justifications for cheating, they feel really flimsy. If it's not working, end it and move on. You've proven able to do it in other songs on this album. And with the ending feeling mostly inconclusive, yes, the journey's ongoing, but not really much of an arc has taken place beyond learning to give in to love, which can feel a little bit thin, especially with Kehlani's blunter lyricism. What we've got, again, probably their best album, certainly their most consistent, but one that falls short yet again of what it could be if the production was remotely competent, especially as there's no song here that matches Change Your Life from their album in 2020. I'm inclined to recommend this because I actually genuinely do want Kehlani to get some proper label attention so they don't have to work with Pop and Oak anymore, but we're also 3 albums in. At some point, it should not be this hard. And finally, from Tate McRae, I used to think I could fly.
I hope it breaks you in two. If I get back all the pain that you put me through, what would you do?
There's a part of me that actually does feel bad for Tate McRae. She's not even 20 yet, and already she's gone through the twin hellish ringers of reality TV and teen pop stardom, where in the latter case you can tell that she's got something of an artistic voice that's just getting engulfed by her label wanting her to recreate more successful acts, be they Billie Eilish or Olivia Rodrigo. That had me significantly worried about this debut, especially as the buzz was suggesting this was far closer to the already dated trap monotony of songs like You Broke Me First than any attempts at something more vibrant like She's All I Wanna Be. And, well, let me start by saying that there is a market for music like this. Tate McRae sounds like the sort of shy, insecure teenager who is more often caught up in the swirl of emotions rather than commanding them, with a sort of husky, trembling, barely controlled delivery that might sound played out in this lane if it wasn't for how the anxiety, it's part of the point. This is an album that is built on plain-spoken relatability more than anything. And given that I'm 15 plus years removed from high school, I understand why it wouldn't quite click for me, except that there's a swath of teenage acts that I have been able to appreciate in recent years for this strand of melodrama, from McRae's more obvious influences to acts like Chloe Moriando or Pink Pantheress. That's not the only issue here. A big problem is Tate McRae's vocals, where in her Poor Girls Alessia Cara's delivery, it's very obvious that it's less choice and more vocal limitations. She can't project her belt convincingly, she openly strains to hit the high notes, and every break amplifies this sense of profound weakness and insecurity, which really does not work when she's got kiss-off songs like Don't Come Back, I'm So Gone, What Would You Do, and What's Your Problem, undercut by the lingering Not Over It that can't land any punches. And that would be fine if the writing was interesting, or textured in all the sad girl angst, painted a fresh scene, or provided some interesting insight, but again, we're dealing with the raw basics, leaning really hard on relatability, where every song wallowing in angst is unconvincingly followed by something that tries to push against it, and it leaves the album feeling really unbalanced. Now granted, the production really doesn't help. This is an album that really wants to fit the intersection between trap pop and the 2000s teen pop rock revival, so you get all the let-in program percussion in the scenes that tried to crib wholesale from Billie Eilish's formula without all the subtlety to set the atmosphere, or good writing, and the inconsistent vocal mixing track to track really does not help, placed opposite a lot of desaturated, weedy guitars that lean on rickety acoustics without muscle or groove. I know some like the attempt at pop rock on She's All I Wanna Be, but if you compare this even with the most vulnerable material of the 2000s, it feels plastic without that spark or presence that came from that era. Frankly, Tate McRae is better off with the dreary pop songs like Feel Like Shit and Go Away that might feel like Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish ripoffs, but they at least feel more comfortable for her and her persona. But to be completely honest, this album lost me on the first proper track, Don't Come Back, where it samples and interpolates Ride With Me by Nelly and City Spud. I mean, you take one of the most kinetic and fun, chill hip-hop jams of the early 2000s, and you make it this clunky, you lost the plot right out of the damn gate. This is thoroughly mediocre at best, and even if you find something relatable off this project, there's more out there that you can connect to than this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. I'll say it again. I understand that with a lot of these that I was expecting more, and this might come across as more negative than I was intending. I really wanted to do this R&B episode to highlight a lot of great stuff that I had seen in the genre this year, but a lot of the stuff that's getting critical acclaim is just not clicking with me, and it's really damn frustrating. Still got through 6 of the projects, and there is some quality here that's worth hearing. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to support the channel, or just argue with me on Discord directly, link to my Patreon right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated, tough times, I understand, but options available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.